Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morning Minutes. Myself, Michael Bergio, James Lamplow for episode 451. Buying a commercial investment. Should I look for one that is vacant? Should I look for a property that is tenanted? They're probably the two main questions I get asked by potential purchasers who are looking to buy a commercial property. And this morning we're going to go through some of the pros and cons, different things to consider, and go from there. James, what's your initial thoughts or comments? People come to you why they want to buy a commercial property that's tenanted. I'm sure you've had a lot of time say, hey, what about this one? Great property, but it's vacant. And the purchaser is like, oh, no. I want something with a tenant. What do you think, or what do you get told? A lot of the reasons.
Yeah. With commercial property, you're typically able to lock in longer tenure with your tenants. So for an investor looking to purchase a property, if it's a tenanted property, they're buying it with the tenant locked in. They've got their fixed rate increases in there. And you might have a 3x3 or a 5x5. So you've got potentially 6, maybe 10 years worth of guaranteed rent in the bank when you make that purchase. So you don't have any time where you're sitting on it vacant. So that's the bones of it, the main parts that people are looking at. But there's a whole lot more depth to it. But I think that's the main thing. It's, am I going to have a vacant property for a long time or not? Do I buy residential so I can get someone in straight away, or do I buy a commercial property, hopefully with a tenant in place? So there's a couple considerations to make.
Yeah, talk us through how long would it take to find a property, to find a tenant, if you get what do you sort of see on average? Let's say DY, for example, over the last few deals we've done.
Look, typically you're expecting maybe even as much as 6 months to find a good tenant for your property. It might not be, it could be a month, it could be less, but I think anyone looking to invest into commercial, if you're buying a vacant possession property, you have to have it in your mind, you have to forecast for that time of vacancy more than anything. So I think being quite savvy with the process and understanding it and having a good agent who's going to help you to find that tenant, put a strong lease into place makes a big difference. I think they really are the main considerations that the people are taking.
Yeah, and I think that the main thing what I say to someone is don't vacancy 3 to 6 months, it's part of it. Just like you calculate stamp duty on a purchase, calculate 6 months vacancy. You're either going to get it when you buy it, so you buy a vacant property and forecast 6 months, or you're going to get it after 5 years of the tenancy. Even some of the best properties, best location can take up to 6 months to get rented. And sometimes you rent it in a week. Like, don't get me wrong, we have it set up. We're keen to do deals very quickly, but I think on average, so you're not disappointed, you look for something, you just budget it in. Like I said, either when you're buying it or in 3 to 4 months' time. Now, the way I look at it, some benefits of buying tenanted and vacant. Well, I think your biggest, I wouldn't say negative. Well, your biggest negative buying a tenanted property, especially Northern Beaches, you're paying more for it. Basically whatever it is. A vacant.
You're paying for the lease.
Yes. Whatever it doesn't, like I've seen 2 identical properties, one with a tenant, one without it, you're paying more. Like I had a property in Howard Avenue, DY, vacant through COVID. I think it was 9 months, and the owners were about to take a deal at say $700,000 purchase price. And at the same time, I found a tenant for the property. We got that deal done very quickly, and then within a couple of weeks, we resold it for they didn't go ahead with the first offer. We sold it for $900,000. So the same property within a 3-week period went from $700,000 to $900,000, all because it had a tenant in place. And you may think to yourself, well, everyone would look to buy a vacant property. Well, the fact is most people want a tenanted property. I reckon 80% of buyers do choose a tenanted property. And the reason is a lot of people don't have the necessary knowledge of commercial property. They may have bought residential, done really well in residential, and they're looking for a good cash return. They've been told about commercial property. They've never bought commercial property before. They don't have relationships with an agent like they made in residential. So they got their guard up. But the one thing they've probably been told about commercial property is it can be vacant for a long time. So they've got that in the back of their mind. They're like, I'm only buying tenanted. So they do. And that means on a property that has a tenant, you may have 20 buyers on it compared to a property that's vacant, you have 3 or 4. So you can just straight away there, just like same as residential, if you got more competition, you generally get a higher price. And also a lot of the time, as long as the lease is done at a good rent, it's done on a yield. So even though a property with a tenant can be worth more, it can actually be worth less if you've done a really low lease. Like through COVID, a lot of people did rent reductions, and an investor wants 6%, 6.5% on a tenanted investment. So if you can imagine, let's use 5% just for round figures. If your property is rented for 20 grand equals $400,000 sale price, but the same property, different owner may have different property, same style of property, but different owner may have rented his for $25,000. That's worth $450,000. And you may think to yourself, that's crazy. Like, because you don't have this in residential. In residential, you're not really mind about a tenant because you can generally get at least within a week. It's not like you're just living there. Commercial, different uses. You may pay more for a doctor leasing your property than a cafe, or a cafe to a lawyer, or a fashion shop to a doctor. You may be willing to pay more because you look at that tenant as more secure and more buyers for it. So you go through that way as well. But another big thing as well, James, a lot of people buy commercial in their super fund. And in their super fund, the banks want the property tenanted. I don't even think they allow you to buy a property vacant. So that just puts more buyers looking for properties with tenants in there as well. And also the cost of funding it. Like, think of this mindset, James, when people buy a residential property, they think, all right, my mortgage is $400 a week. The rent will be $350. I can afford $50. That's what people think. They don't even think, I'll have to pay the full mortgage for a couple of weeks while I get a new tenant. But in commercial property, your property could be empty for 6 months. So that mortgage of $400, you have to pay that for 6 months. A lot of people can't afford that. When banks do your residential loan, a lot of the time they take into account the income it's getting. So instead of you needing the mortgage on top of your own mortgage that your own home or your own rent and your own living expenses to be on top. So you generally need a much higher income to buy a commercial property. I would almost advise people, let's say you can buy a property tenanted for $1 million. I would almost say maybe look at a property vacant for $500,000, buy something smaller. Because if you buy something vacant, we've seen 7, 8, 9, 10% returns, but it could take 6 months.
Yeah, that's right. If you've got the ability for the cash flow to be able to run through the process and allow yourself to find a tenant, put a strong lease in place, it's a good way to invest. And there's a couple of people that we work with, Michael, that they poach vacant properties and they just sit on them until you can put a strong lease in, and then they try and sell them off. So there's a whole other side of that commercial market for buying and selling as well, where you've got a small 1% of people that are looking at it from that sort of lens. But otherwise, people are looking at your vacancy and they're saying commercial, residential lease is faster. I'll have more weeks in the property. Is that a safer investment? So there's no right or wrong answer, but I think we were having quite an interesting conversation this morning about if you're projecting a commercial property is going to have a 10-year lease in it, and you've taken 3 to 6 months to lease that property out, you've got 9.5, well, you've still got 10 full years once the lease is in place with income potentially, if the option is exercised. With a residential property, let's say you hold it for 10 years and you have a new tenant every year. So no tenant stays longer than a year. You might have a week or two of vacancy, plus another week of letting fees, plus another year's worth of management fees. It actually works out fairly similar. I think we'll run the numbers later on, but it's an interesting concept actually as to is residential going to be leased for longer? Probably not in the long run.
Yeah, it's a good point because yes, commercial could be empty for 12 weeks in a row consecutively, but residential generally turns over a tenant every year, 2 years, and you've got maybe 2 weeks vacancy and 2 weeks letting fee each time. So 4 times over 10 years, it could be very, very similar. Luke's asked, do you have 8 to 10% net yields? I have a client. Unfortunately, Northern Beaches, we don't have that high. Anything with a tenant is 4 to 6% net yield. The only chance to get an 8% yield would be buying it vacant and finding a tenant. Other than that, there's too much demand. Stock levels are so low. We're under 100 listings for sale, the whole Northern Beaches. We generally sit on 150 listings. So what's that, down 70%?
33%.
Yeah, 50 over 150. And even from 4 years ago, we're at 220, 250 listings. So dramatically low listings on the Northern Beaches. So that's driving yields even lower.
But buyer activity on the whole, I think we've seen waves of when buyers have come in and come out of the market. And Michael, you know better than anyone else, but investors are back in the market. Anything that's got a good net yield on there is getting snapped up in a matter of days at this stage. It wasn't quite like that maybe 6 to 12 months ago, but anything that does have a strong lease, there's a frenzy over these properties. And there's a very, very small amount of people that are looking at anything that is vacant possession. So there's a really strong angle to take there for someone that has the time that can put that energy into the process. But for the investors out there that are passive, that are looking at the numbers only, and they don't want to look any further, there's a lot of competition to buy.
Very true. And I think that's the wrap. So that's some pros and cons of buying a vacant property, tenanted property. If you have any further questions, want to reach out to myself or James, feel free, happy to help. And we'll be back tomorrow morning, probably another commercial topic. while Mark's away, we keep it commercial.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael.
All righty, everyone. Thank you. Cheers. Bye.